Hey, what's up? Welcome to my channel. My name is Don Miller, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my video. If you like any of my content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. I really appreciate it. So in this video, I want to talk about some of the Python programming books I read, and once again, I'm pretty much just explaining how my journey has been going, learning how to code, things like that. So I'm just trying to be as transparent with you guys as possible concerning myself, how I'm learning. And once again, I'm not saying that you have to learn the way that I learn. I'm just saying what works best for me. So I've been programming, learning for the past about 6 months. And pretty much I was like, you know what? I'm just going to study a language at a time. So what I did, like the first 3 to 4 months of of my journey, I just spent my time reading books on Python. And these books I'm showing you are books that I read myself, and I've read these books multiple times. Pretty much the way I learn is this. I learn based off of repetitiveness. Like I have to constantly expose my brain to the same information over and over and over again until my brain registers that this is important, store this into long-term memory. This works for me. It works really good for me. I'm not saying this works for everyone, but it works for me. So I literally read these books, every one of them. Some of them I read multiple times. Some of them there's some books that I read that are not in this list that I checked out from the library, and that's another good thing too. Say, like, because what I was doing, I was going to Barnes and Nobles and I was buying these books. But say like money's tight for you right now and you can't buy these books because these programming books I bought, they're like $40 a piece. But if you can't afford it, you can always go to your neighborhood library. The one that I go to, I'm kind of surprised they got a lot of like programming books. So these books are the ones that I bought. Now I'm going to show you the progression on how I started reading these books. So the first book that I started off with, just put this over here. I started off with the Python Crash Course. This book pretty much takes you from the fundamentals to more advanced topics. Like it goes from talking about variables, lists, what is a variable, things like that. And it goes on to more complex things like if else statements, booleans, conditional statements, classes, things like that, modules, things like that. So what I like about these books, they're kind of like a series. They're like a series of these books, but they're all read by different programmers. What I like about them is that they give you, like, they explain it to you, but then they break it down to you. Like, they explain it to you, break it down to you, and then they give you an example to try with it. You know what I'm saying? So, like, I'll show you, like, this one. Like, it talks about, like, inserting, I don't know if you're able to see, but it covers, like, inserting lists inserting elements into a list. So I started with this one. This took me about a week to about a week and a half to reading. This is when I first started reading these books, and I want to say this too. Like besides like learning how to code, like starting to read books every week, I feel like it's helped me a lot with like my critical thinking, and it's helped me a lot with like brain fog. Like your brain is pretty much, you could say like your brain is like a muscle, like if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So like you always want to constantly be reading and strengthening your brain. So I started off with the Python Crash Course. After I read that, I moved on to Invent Your Own Computer Games. This was another good one. This pretty much it goes in it goes into details on like how programming works with like computer games. It starts off like basic like stuff like using the random module and like creating a guessing game from like guess the number that I'm using. or guess the number that I'm thinking. Then it goes into like more complex stuff. Like it goes into like the guessing game, it goes into hangman, and then it goes on to like using like modules or libraries. It goes on to like using like importing Pygame and creating the remake of the Alien Invader game and stuff like that. And it's really good. Like talks about like while loops, using while loops. Like while loops are pretty much like conditional statements, and the same of like, while this is true, the program will keep running. You know what I'm saying? But if it's false, then it'll stop or like break. You know what I mean? So you use that a lot, like for determining when the game is over for a player, things like that. Like if the player dies, you know, while they're alive, the game is still going, but you know, when they die, the game ends or quits. You know, and this book I paid $40 at Barnes and Noble for it. And this video, if it gets too long, I might turn this into like a 2-part video. After that, I jumped on to, where was it? I kind of got ahead of myself, but I was like, you know what, this stuff's starting to make sense, so I jumped onto the Beyond the Basic stuff. And this book, like when I first went through it, some of the concepts were hard to understand, but as I kept going through it, it started clicking. And another thing that's cool about these books, I feel like every one of these books that I read in this series, like the first chapter is pretty much they go over like the fundamentals with you. So pretty much it's like a recap, and then it jumps into the more advanced statements or more advanced topics. So pretty much this book is talking about like, you know, writing efficient code, and you know, pretty much the best way I can explain is like you can write a code to produce something, and you may be able to produce the end result of that, but you didn't do it in you know, as efficient as possible. Like with programming, you don't want to just write code. You want to write efficient, clean, good-looking code, because you know, once again, employers are going to look at that, things like that. So that was a good one. The next one I jumped to was learn to code by solving problems. And this one was pretty much this was like a very fundamental one. I feel like this one was like, you read this one before you read the Python crash course. I feel like this was like very fundamental, and like pretty much this, like it was pretty much like it covered like the fundamentals, but it was a lot about like having the mindset of a programmer, like how to critically think, what to look for, things like that. So this was really good. Let's see, trying to think of something I could show you in here. I pretty much explained it. I mean, if you want to, I would recommend buying it and reading it, but pretty much it goes over the same thing that's in the Python crash course. Is just like, I feel like it's like you read that first, then you jump into the crash course. After that one, I went to the Python one-liner. This one was pretty much talking about getting the same effects of, like, say it took you to write, like, for example, the if-else statement. You know, you could write that in one line, you know, instead of having it separate blocks of code or separate lines of code. And it pretty much talks about like getting the same results with code, but using less code. And then the next two books I went on was Cirrus Python. This book was pretty much, it was intermediate to advanced. It talked a lot about like using classes, what else, you know, working with databases, SQL, things like that. So this one, I felt like when I started reading this one, it was about the right time, but I wouldn't read this first. I would read this after all the other ones I mentioned. I did this one, and then natural language using Spatie. This one was pretty cool. This one talks about like how to use like building chatbots and things like that, which is very interesting. Goes into what else, like databases. I think it goes into algorithms. It's been a while since I read this. It's been at least like a couple months, but it's a good read. You learn a lot about vectors, things like that, and then automated the boring stuff. Now this is like a beginner book too. I read this at the end. I don't know why. I just chose to read it at the end of the list. But you would want to read this. If I could say the first three books you should read, it should be Python Crash, or excuse me, it should be Learn to Code by Solving Problems, Python Crash Course, Invent Your Own Computer Games with Python, and then Automate the Boring Stuff with Python. So I would say the first four books you should read. And once again, if you don't want to go spend $40 a book, you can always go to your library. I just wanted to buy these because this is when I first got started, and I was like, you know what, if I buy these books because I'm spending this type of money, it will help me commit, and it did. So once again, if you don't want to spend that money, you can go to your nearest library, and hopefully they have it. It's weird, like the library that I go to, like they had some Python books, but they had more of like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, things like that.